We've got it. Tonight we're very privileged to have Kerry Templeton all the way from sunny Nelson, which I believe is in level 0.5 or something by now. I'm not quite sure. We're in level 3 with picnics. Welcome, Kerry.
G'day. How you going? Yeah. So I was going to give a bit of a Hops 101 kind of presentation. I've got a PowerPoint, but I said feel free to just butt in any time and ask questions.
Well, we've got a chat thing on the side, which we can sort of keep a little bit seamless if I don't want to disturb your flow there. Or
this is honestly, I pulled together a bunch of presentations that contain nothing IP sensitive, so I could, just to talk. So there's no the flows. This is not a practiced speech. I'm running this pretty.
So you don't give us the good shit. You're my friends here, bud.
I'm going to tell you about a couple of new hops coming out from New Zealand hops. About as much as I can give you. Good. So I share that one. Does that work? Can you guys see if I do this? Hopefully this works.
Yep, we can see.
Hops 101
presentation.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So, Hops 101. I don't know what you guys really want to hear about. I'm going to give a little bit of a rundown of hops and what they are, but right at the end, I've got a little bit of if you want to grow them for home brewing or something like that. That's what you could do, and a little bit about the breeding. But basically, hops are a cousin of cannabis, and they you have male and female flowers, and the female flower, it's not really the flower by the time you get it as a cone, but is what you want to, is what you're harvesting. They're native to Asia and Europe and North America. Interestingly, they're not pretty much everywhere around that northern hemisphere. You find hops wild, and this just gives you an idea of where they're found. Northern hemisphere where they're found, and the southern hemisphere where they'll grow. So there's not many places in the southern hemisphere that can grow them. If you look at that, that's us, Australia, South Africa, and a little bit in Argentina.
Are we naughty? Is that why we're red?
I stole this out of one of Ron's slides, one of Ron's talks. So,
what is that? Is that to do with temperature ranges, climate? It's quite a delineated.
It's a day length thing. You can grow them north or south of those points. Neo-Mexicanus in the US is actually found right down near the Mexican border, but they need a certain amount of day length because they got to have that dormancy period. Hops virtually need the dormancy. You can't just continually grow them. You can trick them into growing continuously, but they eventually die basically. They suffer so much that they go dormant anyway. And naturally within these ranges, that's where they get the right. North of that, they get just too cold, or south of that. Well, south of that is no land other than Antarctica. North of that, they get too cold. I think they do grow wild in Scandinavia to some extent, but probably at the southern tips. They like a good frost. Shit, in the US, I was there not last year, was it? 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago in Yakima. And they were going, we get to minus 20 in winter, and it was minus 20 C. It wasn't. That's bloody cold. And they actually need a bit of a chill. For instance, South Africa, where they grow them, they've actually bred them specifically to be able to tolerate slightly shorter day lengths. So they've bred specifically for their climate, and to some extent we have too. If you look at where we are compared to the northern hemisphere, is certainly Europe, where they grow them, is sort of up around. Can you see my pointer?
Yeah.
And we're more like northern Spain, so we're a fair way south of where they grow them, but it works. Hop cone is what you're harvesting, And what you really want out of it is the yellow lupulin glands, which is where all the oils and plant secondary metabolites are stored or concentrated. And these are made up, you've got your hop acids, your bitter acids, which is somewhere between 5 and 25%. That's your alpha beta acids, polyphenols, and then your essential oils, which is the essential oils is the one when you're doing your dry hopping, probably where most of your flavor profile is coming from. And that's only somewhere between 0.5 and 3% of the total weight. There's alpha acids and beta acids. Alpha acids is your bittering units. I didn't drill down too much into this. There's, you can go down into the types of alpha acids and the types of bittering you can get from it, like high cohumulone, low cohumulone. The theory that low cohumulone is better, than the bitterness is smoother. And I think that's fairly well. It's theory. I think it's fairly well known by the brewing industry. What's less well understood is the essential oil profile. There's a lot of work going on at the moment trying to figure out what flavors you get from the essential oils. And I can tell you right now what we see in our little brewery at work and what we measure says a lot of the data out there is bullshit. But they hops that are high, and if you get a hop and on paper it should be citrusy, and that can be totally not that. But it all comes down to the combination of chemicals. There's just so many of them in there. You listen to people. I listened to a podcast yesterday, and they were talking about there's 7 or 8 things you really need to look for, and I was sitting again. I can tell you right now, there's more than that. That you just can't. There's things you can't measure, which is problematic. You say can't measure. You'd all hear the thiol components in hops. They are effectively in the parts per billion range, and really odor active. Humans can smell them, but when you try and put them on a GC to measure them, it's not even, they just don't detect them. You need really specialist equipment. There's only one lab in the world that actually is accurately doing it. It's a wine lab in southern France. Anyone else who says you can do it, as far as I'm aware at the moment, hasn't proven that they can do it. I know that's where Yakima Chiefs send all theirs over there. Right, hop seasons. Over winter, they're dormant. Basically, if you look at a hop paddock in winter, it's just grass. It looks like a paddock of grass. Early spring, they start emerging. You get into sort of October, November. Right now, some of the varieties would be just about ready to be trained. Certainly by the end of October, early November, you're training. Summer, they flower around Christmas time. Cones develop through January, February, and then you're harvesting late summer, early autumn. Just got a few pictures of some commercial harvesting operations. Anyone who's got a interest in engineering, a commercial hop harvesting operation is really interesting. They're really mechanical now. They're not at all hand picking. They drive along. They've one tractor drives along, chopping the plant off at the bottom, like in this picture, and the other tractor follows along behind with a cutter at the top that just cuts the top wire and drops them on the trailer. And they drive to the shed where they drop the hops on the ground. The plant whole. This is a whole bine, everything 5 and a bit meters, and they hang them up and they just run through these machines. And there's just conveyor belts and fans and dribble belts and stuff. And the whole idea is to separate the hops from the leaf and leaves and stems and other bits and pieces. And they're bloody effective. It's surprisingly, clean hop comes out the other end. And I don't know how many of you have ever been to a commercial hop farm, but some of the big ones are really impressive to see in operation. Then it goes up to the kilning, gets kilned to dry it. There are 2 types of kilns, realistically. Flatbed kilning, which is what this picture here shows. It's basically a big, it might be sort of 1/2 meter deep bed of hops that they blow hot air up through, 65-degree air up through. The other way to do it is a tipping kiln, which they have a layer at the top. They dry it for a certain amount of time. They they open up the floor and it drops down to the next level, and they usually have 3 levels. So when it drops down to the next level, more hops come up the top, and the air is blowing up from the bottom. And by the time they get to the bottom level, theoretically they're all dried. And one of the reasons they do those is it's supposed to mix them up as they fall down, so you don't get wet patches and dry patches. The big flatbed ones, they'll have someone in there who's got a rake, and they'll actually get in there and rake them. Well, the big long-handled rake. And they basically go onto gets dropped onto a conditioning floor, stays there for about 12 hours, just to cool them down. It brings them down to temperature. That's basically overnight, and the next day they feed them all into these big front things here, which feed into the balers, and they bale them, and they're in the cool store within 40, less than 48 hours, 24 hours of harvest. They're in the cool store at 0 degrees.
And Kerry, sorry, these are still the hop flowers. They haven't been pelleted yet, right? Those aren't pellets.
Hop flowers. So pelleting's done. With the industry, they have, or depends on the company actually. Certain farms, there's a couple of the independent guys will pellet directly from their conditioning floor, whereas most of them will actually bale them up, put them in a cool store, and then pull them out up after hop harvest to pellet. I think there's realistically not a hell of a lot of difference between the two. There's it was just a logistics exercise. The biggest thing is getting them into a cool store and cool as quick as possible. That would be, yeah. So hop breeding.
Yep. Just with that, is it a matter of they have to get the humidity and the water out before they stick in the cool store?
It is. So if you don't get them dry, if they get them down to about 10% moisture, they actually have penalties. If they go too dry, they get penalised, and if they're too wet, they get penalised. So if you go too dry, the hops tend to fall apart and they shatter. They're aiming for about 10%. I think it's 10% moisture, which gives the hops a good consider. It actually, at 10% moisture, they can be pelleted. It helps with the pelleting process. So it means that they go through the pelleting plant better. They still maintain. The whole idea is the hops aren't crushed at this point. So as long as the lupulin gland isn't split open, oxygen is not too much of a problem at that point. It's only once you crush them that, and when I say crush them through a pelleting plant, that's when oxygen really becomes a problem. From what I understand, I honestly haven't looked into that in too much depth. Any questions? As I said, just ask questions anytime. Hop breeding program, or hop breeding in New Zealand. Hops were introduced about 150 years ago. Sometime in the 1930s or 40s, they sort of started noticing this disease was killing the hops they had here. All the hops they had were a US variety called Lake Cluster. They started a breeding program in the 1950s to try and solve this disease problem. It was a root rot disease, and they actually pretty quickly solved it. They brought some fuggle over and crossed some fuggle derived plants to these Lake Cluster derived plants, and that pretty well solved the problem real quick. They got rid of the root rot problem almost instantly. Fuggle carries the resistance genes, and as long as you keep a bit of fuggle genetics in them, they're all good. Sort of in the 1980s, they moved to what they like to call aroma types. And by aroma types, I mean they were trying to copy classical European aroma varieties, sort of the Hersbrucker Pure, Hallertau Mittelfrüh type varieties. And there's some arguments about how successful they were. Rewalker was one point had some name, it was B-SARS. I think that was Rewalker, and D-SARS.
There was B-SARS and D-SARS.
One's Rewalker and one's Motueka.
Yeah,
anyway, they were both
D-SARS, wasn't it? Yeah.
I think D-SARS was Motueka, and maybe the other way around.
Yeah,
the D stands for DB because DB identified it. And the other one's B-SARS because some Belgian brewery liked it. That was the simplicity of the naming.
Oh, and that's become Motueka.
One of them's Motueka, one of them's Rewalker.
The Belgian one is become
Motueka.
Motueka.
Okay.
Yep.
There you go.
Yep. B size is much bigger.
And those two are bred as aromatypes, but they're totally different to anything out of the German noble breeding program or noble hops. And then, as things changed in 2000s and hop forward IPAs became popular, the demand for hop, we've stopped calling them aromatypes, because aromatypes in most places refers to European noble type hops, and we've started calling them flavor hops, flavor type hops. Now that's not actually a real thing. That would, in my mind, that would take an Amarillo and probably Citra as well, and a few and all those some North American New World North American ones. And yeah, that's sort of thing. I've sort of got a bit of a description of when the hops were released. They've been a pretty steady release, particularly since early 2000s, when Stelvin was 2000, and Mootry 2015, Nectaron, what was that, last year? In the research program, we have a tiny little harvester. I know some of you have been to our site as part of the homebrew conference, but you have a tiny little hop picker. It's pathetic compared to the commercial ones, but it's perfect for doing single hops. So we run a single hop through and take the hops off that one plant, keep them separate, package them up, and now, I'll be honest, broad traits of interest are yield, harvest window, and flavour. Our whole program is paid for by the hop growers, so they get the main say as what we want. And to be honest, if the hops don't yield and they don't have a right harvest window, they're not gonna grow them. So they have to be growing. And hops, when you want talking something like Stelvin, they get 300 hectares of Stelvin planted at least in New Zealand. That's a fairly big amount of hops. Yield is fairly important. Rewalk is one of the examples of a hop that probably shouldn't have only made it out of the program because of its flavour. It is not a high yielding hop. One of the reasons it's rare, it's hard to get hold of, is it is actually, it's low yielding. It has a tendency to die. So yeah, we have a little pilot brewery, or a little brewery on our site. It's a all grain setup. It's built by Crystal Engineering, who's built a few commercial breweries around the country. Glycol jacketed fermenters, and we can put through, we've got the capacity in the whole hop program to harvest, measure, and taste over 800 hops each season. In the field, we actually have over 3,000 different hops, but we won't pick them all. The seedlings in particular, if they're not, one, there's a bunch of males, there'll be a bunch of male seedlings in there, so they don't get harvested. And then there's a whole bunch of ones that just wouldn't yield enough to make it worthwhile harvesting. And we cut through, but yeah, we can put through about 800 hops roughly each year.
Kerry, you mentioned male seedlings.
Yep.
I thought the whole New Zealand approach is the triploid thing.
So
where are these males coming from?
Triploids, you'll still get male seedlings that are sterile. So when you cross a hop, to make triploids, you cross a diploid and a tetraploid, and when you get the offspring, you'll get males and females. You're not going to get all one sex. The advantage of the triploids is they're sterile, so when you have a male around, you don't get seeds, or you get very low levels of seeds.
And that's something unique to the New Zealand program, isn't it? No one else does that?
The Australian guy, I believe the Australians use that triploid hops a bit. The US have bred triploid hops at times. Liberty and Mount Hood are triploids. I think Willamette is as well. But they've moved away from it. There's pros and cons, and there's a major con is that triploid breeding makes your breeding difficult. It adds a whole level of data and sort of just a complexity to the breeding that really effectively it almost makes it, it's not just doubling the complexity, but it's almost a factor of 10 more difficult from a computing perspective to work out, the parentage and things like that. I'm not explaining it very well, but there's advantages too. So if we take a female hop that's a tetraploid that's got 4 copies of each gene and cross it to a diploid male, which has only got 2 copies, you'll get 2/3 of your genetics will come from your female. So then you've got a better chance of knowing what that plant's going to be like, because you can't with the male hops. You have no idea what really you've got. You can just look at them and go, it's a big plant, and that's about the limit of your ability to phenotype them, or look at their structure. They have no. We do chemistry on them, but it's the value of it. I'm not 100% convinced is there. But you need the male in a breeding program. You need the males, and it's a bit like when you look at dairy cows. You have to have a bull to produce calves, but actually the bull is just you've really got to look at his daughters to work out how good he is.
Right. The meat's the end.
Yeah. So we do get a lot of male. About 50. Well, it's pretty well 50-50 males and females. It's actually with triploids it gets more complicated. That it's 1 in 6. It's a female and 1. If you do the cross tetraploid, the way you do the crosses and the other way around, it can be one can be 1 in 6 female and 1 can be 1 in 6 male, which makes things complicated. And then you throw hermaphrodites in there, and that just makes things even more complicated. So, yeah,
800's a lot.
800's a lot. This will be the first year we're going to put 800 hops through the brewery. That's tasting approximately 25 hops each week. It's roughly in that number, I think. It's not every week of the year too, by the way. Just yeah, but we put around 20-25 hops each week.
So you're doing 25 brews on average a week too?
No. We have to be a bit careful because some of this it's not really IP, but basically we split the ferment. We do a ferment. It's all post fermentation dry hopping.
Okay.
Is where we're testing them. And that allows us to do high throughput, and you can probably, most home brewers could probably figure out a way of doing that. Split your fermentation up into dry hop small batches. We end up with about 3 litres of each hop float to taste.
Just so interesting. What kind of vessels are you using for that kind of small? I mean, that's a cool thing for a home brewer to do in terms of experimenting and playing. What kind of vessels are you using to do that real small batch fermentation?
Well, the fermentation is done in the big vessel, the main ferment, the 55 litre ferment.
So the dry
you can see in
hopping,
that photo. We've got a little corny keg. They're 10 litre cornies with a dip tube on them. We basically our turnaround is we've got 2 weeks from grain to glass, so we don't muck around. The dry hop for 48 hours. We brew for 7 days. 7 days. So Tuesday we brew. The following Tuesday they get dry hopped for 48 hours. Thursday they get transferred to a conditioning keg, and they get tasted the following week. Then we're really not mucking around. Part of it's about the freshness. Our beers aren't filtered. They're not pasteurized or anything like that. It's all about trying to get them as fresh as possible, because most of you probably realise hoppy IPAs or hoppy beers are best drunk fresh.
Kerry, if you're just doing dry hops, how do you know how they'll behave if they're put in as aroma hops?
Late in the boil or anything like that? Honestly, we don't. But the demand at the moment from the hop industry is for hops that would be used in hazy IPAs, and yeah, I know, I'm looking at some of your faces. Hazy IPA and
I'm just taking the mic because I'm trying one of Sean's beers and he was watching me, so I was just making some horrible faces.
The reality is, if you're a hop grower, you love hazy IPAs because they use so inefficiently using hops.
Thank you.
We dry hop them at 10 grams per litre, and I'll be honest, that's only because the math is easy. There's some papers out by, I don't know if you've heard of Tom Shellhammer. He did some research on dry hopping rates and come to the conclusion anything over 8 grams per litre, really, your returns for the amount of hop you put in is minimal. I don't know. There's some hazes out there. I think up 30. I don't know. Jeff might be able to confirm this, but 30 or even 40 grams per litre can be a dry hopping rate.
Yeah, we're sort of probably around 15 to 20.
Yep. And that's if you're as you're a grower, that's great. If you notice, a lot of the hop industry now is actually trying to find out ways to concentrate their hop. Like you got the cryo hops and all of that sort of stuff coming through from Yakima. The hop oils are starting to become more common. New Zealand hops have got theirs. Yakima's got theirs. It's sort of hop oil. Basically, that steam distilled. I don't even know if they're steam distilled. I don't really know. I don't think they're exactly steam distilled because I've tried steam distilled hop oils and they ain't the same as the real thing. And some of these ones are selling are quite similar. So yeah. We've got a sensory variation. This is an old photo. This predates me working down there. We don't really do sensory panels like this anymore. Now what we do is we stand around the brewery and there's 6 of us that have that have done, well, this year we'll be doing tasting about 800 hops, and we make a pretty basic, certainly at the seedling stage, we're just going, is it good or not? And if it's good, it goes forward. If it's not, it gets dumped. They get one shot basically, and they're thrown away. There's just too many to screen in high detail. And then when we get down into into advanced selections, we start asking these questions where you end up with these flavor wheel, where you can drag these flavor wheels out of them. But we're basically getting to the point where we can hand them over to a commercial brewer and say, we think this one's good. You take it and tell us what you can do with it.
You do a lot with the cooked veg part of the wheel there, couldn't you?
You get some that come up with it. We got some that are sulfur. We've got an entire group of hops. I don't know how the hell you describe it other than some of them taste good. I mean, some of them taste quite nice, and others taste like, well, not taste, smell is probably better to describe it as. The smell is like someone's just farted in your beer. It really is, and but others have that sulfur, but they also have this fruitiness going through. There's one or two of them that are, outstanding, but that sulfuriness really puts a lot of people off.
If you put that sulfur in with a lager yeast, which sort of cleans up sulfur that you get from that yeast, would that clean up those compounds from the hop?
I don't know, because we don't really know what the compounds are. It's on our sort of thing to hunt out and figure out what the hell these compounds are, but right now it's, I'd be interested to try. I mean, it'd be probably easier test would just be to brew a lager with it and chuck it in. I don't know. They could just be, I suspect they're just harvested a touch late, some of them. So harvesting hops late, you'll get the onion. It certainly pushes things into the onion garlic spectrum. And the cooked veg is, to my mind, is more you've just left your hops on the dry hops for too long. It's almost like composty sort of smell.
What's your time frame for from hey, we think this is all right, what are you going to do with it, and gives you feedback, to actually going, yeah, this is a good one, let's actually take some time and do it?
So if you're talking at the seedling stage, so we identify a seedling that was, you just want you're talking about how many years it takes from a hop to be commercialized, or more?
Yeah.
So I'll go on to the next slide because I can talk about these two. These are two hops to watch out for. NZ8, they're currently just numbered NZH 101 and 102. 102 is probably going to be released next year, assuming everything else goes to plan. They were both crossed in 2012, to give you a rough idea. They'd be sort of the quicker. So 2012 to 2022. So 10 years from woe to go, but we've known they've probably been 4 years since for the last 3 to 4 years, they've shown a lot of promise. And I think they're going to be. Well, certainly 102 has got high yield. It's got high flavour. Really is starting to. It's getting a lot of people all around. It's not just New Zealand. I think that beer from westbound and down. I think. I just be honest. I just googled that, found pictures and beers. And that was from somewhere in the States. The one above it with NZH 101 is. It's a Hop Butcher. They're out of the States somewhere.
Have they changed the naming scheme? Because I remember there was an epic there a few years back that I thought it was like a 4-digit.
They used to have Hort. Nectaron was Hort 4337,
Right.
which was the breeder code. These hops have been sold basically prior to, they have a breeder code as well. I know the breeder code, but they were sold to New Zealand Hops and they assigned their own code for IP purposes. So their IP, intellectual property, plant patent, plant variety rights number is those two. This is why can talk about these two, because they've already got that protection. And this is a complication in the system. So until they have protection, you can't do a commercial brew with them. In fact, I couldn't give hops to any mates to do any brews or anything really, because they're not, they've got no protection. But these ones have been protected for the last 12 months. They actually have, from the time they do a commercial brew, they have 12 months to apply for protection, and that's, you don't really want to press go on that unless you're pretty confident it's going to make it. So I know there's 3 others sitting there now that they're sending out to brewers at the moment. So I'm guessing they'll start the protection process in the next few months. And then behind that, there's a whole lot more that going
Is
forward.
there a scale for what is considered to be a commercial brew to get that protection?
No, there's not. It actually comes down to the definition of, has the hop been described? So if I put up a hop, and I just put up, even I was just talking to you about it in a presentation like this, and had a thing saying it has a strong, like I say, of NZH 101, has a strong citrus flavour and aroma, that's potentially enough to scarper your ability to get protection on it. And these companies want to get protection because they've invested a lot of money to get that. They're like a patent. The plant patent lasts for 20 years. So after 20 years, they cease to exist. So for instance, Nelson Selvin, it comes off plant protection this month. So potentially Nelson Selvin will be available for homebrewers to grow. I don't know for certain. I suspect it might be because it's out there in multiple places. So I don't see why it wouldn't be.
That must be really hard, Kerry, to patent a hop, because the criteria that defines it, I mean, you're talking, it's almost subjective to taste and aroma.
Here's the thing. They don't ask, the patent question does not ask anything about flavor. They don't even ask the chemistry. You can put the chemistry in and submit it, but they ask, what is the shape of the leaf? How many leaves are there per branch? How many cones are there per branch? When does it mature? In fact, to be honest, I probably should be out in the field this next week making notes on when they come out of the ground, when they, the dormancy, when they break dormancy. All of those sort of things are the questions they ask. They don't ask, what does it taste like? So you could have 2 hops that taste exactly the same, but could both have plant protection because they look totally different.
Gary, so DNA fingerprinting still isn't used?
It's not used. It's not accepted. I know where you're going there, Jeff. I think it should be, but no, they're quite old school in that respect. In fact, as someone who's worked and done DNA testing and all that sort of stuff, it seems a little bit archaic that you're still relying on what they look like to say is it different or not. But because honestly, it is kind of subjective. You asked me to go out in the field and identify from the plant patent description that I'm looking at a certain hop, and there's a couple of hops I could walk out in the field and say, yep, that's Motueka, for instance, looks like Motueka. And at this time of year, Selvin is kind of obvious, but most of them kind of just look the same. Pacific Jade's got slightly longer cones, and
So is this a case of the law needing to catch up?
It is a bit, although they've just rewritten, or they are currently rewriting the law, and there's still no real provision in there for DNA. It's the lawyers trying to make things more complicated than it needs to be, in my mind. I hope there's not any lawyers in here that work in plant and patent protection.
DNA down to a QR code. Just want QR codes. That's all.
Yeah.
Kerry, of the 800 hops you look at each year,
yep.
The ones that don't make it, do you keep any kind of fingerprint of them so you've got them in the background?
We have, if they don't make, well, the seedlings that don't make it, they go. We don't really muck around too much with them. Once they're an advanced selection, if they're high yielding but their flavor's not good, we'll still hang on to them because they might be of use some other at later time. We've got, there are hops out there that have got high yield, reasonably high alpha, but right now they're not marketable. So we put them in what we call a holding pen and just sit on them.
Yep.
If in the future the market changes, it costs us very little to have it sitting, 2 plants in the field or 5 plants in the field. I mean, that's just an example. I'm not really, we don't, so that sort of thing.
Storage is literally planted in the field.
Yep.
It's not like you can take seeds and then put them in a seed bank or something, right?
Yeah, seeds, so hops don't breed true. So if you cross them, the seeds will be totally different. So, you won't get, chances of hitting the same thing from the seedlings are pretty slim. There's some, I've yet to find a hop that tastes exactly like its mum, basically. Comet is one that seems to show nice daughters, but that shows nice daughters, but they're never the same as the mum. And yeah, we are looking at tissue culture and cryogenic storage of hop material, but that's a long way down the path.
It worked for Walt Disney.
Did it?
Oh, wait, we don't know actually.
Yeah. The reality is hops are perennial. They will survive in the field. There's hop growers around that don't quote me on this, but no, it's being recorded. But I believe there's hops in some of the orchards that are over of Green Bullet that have been there since the day Green Bullet was released, and that's over 50 years ago. So, hops basically will last forever, and if you plant them in the field, so as long as you don't have a natural disaster come through and wipe them out, you're all good. We do have hops backed up at other sites. Plant and Food has sites all around the country, and we've got hops backed up at a few other sites. So we're not at risk of losing the really important stuff anyway.
How do you once you've got a plant that is good to go? How do you sort of scale it out for an orchard, or
yep.
do you clone them up, or
yep.
How does that happen?
It's basically take cuttings. So if you've got a seedling that's really good, we might plant. So seedling's one plant. We'll clone it. Just take cuttings, and you get maybe 20 plants off it. You could go up to 100 plants, and then you plant those in the field in what we call replicated trials, and get a bit more. You got a bit of geographic. It's not geographic. It's one side of the paddock versus the other side of the paddock. So you have to make sure there's no environment. Try and remove the environmental differences as much as possible, and then and from 20 plants you can propagate 5,000 off 20 plants, so you pretty scale up pretty damn quick. Hops are really easy to propagate or clone. You just take a cutting, stick it in the ground, it'll grow.
Just from 20 to 5,000 plants, how many kilos of dry pellet hops would you get, just roughly?
So 3,000 plants per hectare, roughly, and industry average is around 2 tons of dried hop per hectare. For instance, to put an example, Nectaron's up around 3 tons per hectare. So some varieties are higher, and Rewalk is down at more like 1,500, 1.5 tons per hectare. So that 5,000 plants is enough to make, if you can get up to 6,000 plants, you're looking at 4 tons of hops, dried.
That's the dried flower or the dried
Dried
pellets?
flour. Yep, dried flour.
flowers. And so pellets would be
Oh, you might lose
2
10%.
ton, 10. Okay, cool.
No,
Okay.
pellets weigh the same as the dried cones, so they just push the whole lot through. There's a little bit of loss at each end, but not on a something like Salvin where they're pushing through 300 tons. You're probably only losing 100 kgs at each end. It's a bigger problem if you've got something like, I don't know, Rewalker where there's 10 tons of it, but even then it's still marginal. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Kerry, you mentioned that green bullet had been, some growers have got it in the ground for 50 years. Is there any possibility that genetic variants can happen over that time?
Without propagating them, probably not. There's a bigger chance of getting genetic variation would be from taking cuttings over time. I mean, there is a possibility. I'd never say no. The bigger issue with those plants is they've probably got more virus load. So plants get viruses, and viruses affect hop. There's about 4 or 5 viruses we say worry about. It's probably not the right word because we don't really test for them or worry about them much at all, but that possibly have an effect in hops. And I would say those green bullet would be riddled with them. But there's some people that actually say the viruses add to the flavor. The higher, older plants have a different flavor profile, and they put that down to the viruses. I have no idea if that's actually true or not. It's just, rumor or people just guessing, really.
Hey,
So,
Kerry,
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask is, in terms of the hops that you're breeding or your association's breeding, Kerry, are you selling them to certain farms, or do you just provide them to them and then they have to provide the hops back, or how does that sort of work?
We have a agreement. It's not exclusive, but it's currently the agreement. The only one we have is with New Zealand Hops, the cooperative, and so they pay us to breed hops for them. There's nothing to stop someone else coming along and saying, we'll give you X amount of dollars and will you breed a hop for us? But right now, New Zealand Hops is the client. So New Zealand Hops is a cooperative of growers, and they have a committee basically of their growers who decide what the traits that are of interest are. Harvest yield is always going to be of interest to them. Making sure it doesn't harvest the same time as another hop. You don't want it to be at the same harvest date of another hop that's got high value.
And is the high alphas part of that as well?
I don't think high alphas is a thing. Well, no, I can say high alphas is not something we really pay attention to at the moment. I do because things may change in the future, but right now, so if you look back at hops historically, they've actually been treated like a commodity for until very recently, because the whole idea of the hop was it provided the bittering units for those big breweries, and the big breweries basically funded the breeding programs to produce higher alpha hops, so that they had to use less hops in their brews, which meant the growers were getting less and less money for their hops, and so it's not really something we look for. But if we get something that comes through with 17 or 18% alpha, we don't throw it away. It's and I will say alpha, although that's not a great marker, higher alpha hops often have slightly more flavor than the lower alpha hops for whatever reason. It's not a perfect, by no means a perfect marker. There's some quite low alpha hops that have good flavor as well. So
Can you get on to the next slide?
So I think this is my last slide. Yeah, this is basically, I thought I'd chuck this one in there because a lot of you guys. I remember when I was in the brew club and there were lots of people growing their own hops, and there's a lot of ways to do it. If you're growing at home, you don't need to grow to 5 meters. You can grow up your fence at the backyard. The big one I would say is, as long as you've got good irrigation, good chuck a fair bit of fertilizer on and got a nice sunny location, hops will grow. They are a weed effectively.
So what's the ideal daylight hours then?
Around here, well, ideally in New Zealand, I actually think honestly, the further south you go, the better they'll grow. But they'll grow. All it's going to do is you're going to get less production. So if you're in Auckland, if you're a commercial grower, you probably wouldn't want to grow hops commercially in Auckland. Hand on heart, and I've said this to the industry, I think you could grow hops commercially from Taupo south. I think the biggest problem with Auckland is and Auckland North is the lack of frosts in winter to some extent. They need a chill, and I don't think that helps them either. Because you can fix the lighting problem really easily with some low value LED light, it's not, you don't need light for photosynthesis. It's just light. So we've done it down here with a couple of varieties where we just chuck some LED lights out in the orchard, and it just tricks the plants into thinking the days are longer. But it's not really necessary.
Is the frost for for bud set, or like in terms of like a lot of the fruit, or is it more for like controlling sort of nasties and
Honestly, I don't know. If I'm really honest, I don't know. I think it does help control the nasties, and in some varieties, I think some varieties have a chill requirement and others don't. My reasoning, I've got to be a bit careful how I say this, but as I said, we have got hops growing at different sites around New Zealand, and they're spread from the north to the south and down south. A lot of hops come away quite early, whereas further north you go, some hops really struggle to start growing. From what I've seen, Cascade grows everywhere. So if you can get hold of Cascade, it'll probably grow in Auckland just about as well as it grows down here. If you got hold of, what's one? Well, you can't get hold of Rewalker as far as I'm aware yet. But that one probably won't do so well in Auckland. But if you're down in Central Otago, it'll probably grow really well.
How long is the protection on hops? Is it a fixed period of time, or do you apply for, how does that work?
Plant patents are 20 or 22 years, I believe. And don't ask me what, there's 20 years on some plants and 22 on others. And it's something to do with them being a woody tree versus something else. And it's really, hops are 22. Rewalker's off Rewalker never had protection. I'm of the understanding, so I've got here, if you want to buy hops, you would have all heard about Wild About Hops, the guys in somewhere down near Christchurch. I know they've got a bunch of New Zealand a lot of the older New Zealand hops varieties just recently. I believe they've got Motueka's, I've got Motueka. I think that's on their website now. I'm pretty sure they've got Rewalker as well. They're just propagating it up to make sure they've got enough to sell. They didn't get much of it, but they've got some.
Yeah, they haven't put it on their website.
Yeah, but it is coming. So,
hey, Kerry, that you've got a shit ton of different hops that you go through trial, and it takes 10 years to get to an actual patented hop.
The patent probably comes about
what's
6
your
or 7.
feel?
But yeah. Sorry, keep going. You're muted.
Oh, sorry. trying to control the Zoom. I'm just looking at the volume and I guess the groups that you're talking to and what their expectations are around hops, because I almost feel like there's a little bit of challenge around what a brewer would want versus a hop grower would want.
Yep. I get what you're saying. Exactly what you're saying there. There is a bit of a challenge there. I think that it really comes down to they want stuff that's going to be it has to have outstanding brewing qualities. So anything that goes forward has to fit. Like I said, I had my 3 criteria, which was harvest date or yield, harvest date, and brewing flavor, aroma, which is just brewing quality. They have to be able to sell it. If they can't sell it, they're not going to grow it. So Nectaron, for instance, I know there's some people out there that that think it's not that great, but there's other people out there that love it. I mean, they seem to be able to sell shit tons of it. So,
you know, the NHC thing where we,
Yep.
I think it was the last one we tasted.
Yep.
One of trial ones. Was that Nectron or not?
I think it was. Pretty sure it was Nectaron, and it may have been one of these other two as well. In fact, it could have been Nectaron plus these two, because they would have been the only things I've been allowed to presented.
Yeah, but
at the time
with the brewing at the facility, I mean, the brewing was a bit muddled, shall we say?
Yeah,
it's quite hard to get the flavour profiles out of the things. But
yep.
I think you've improved that in your processes, yeah.
Oh, the process. I don't actually like taking beers off to events anymore. So I've done this a bit with Jeff. I've bring the odd beer up and we try and do a bit of sensory. The trouble, they just do not travel. You do them, taste them at work. I'll be honest, we probably have an issue with oxygen in our beers. But when you're tasting them, when you keep them in the fridge, basically you dry hop, transfer straight in the fridge and taste them within 5 days, it's not an issue.
Yeah.
When you ship them somewhere and they warm up a bit and then everything turns to shit, basically. We actually put that enzyme in that the ALCD1, whatever it is, the diacetyl reducing enzyme. We're not brewing we're definitely not following the German brewing rules. You know, our brewers to brew a beer that that produces a consistent hoppy beer. It's in the last 3 years, it's improved dramatically each year. This year's been, I'll be honest, outstanding. I actually quite often just want to drink the beer at work. When you get a good hop comes through, I'd quite happily take that home and drink that.
Yeah.
You know, yeah. There are quite a few.
Like, who's responsible for like the marketing, like creating that brand name, like Nectaron, and creating a story and the romance behind it, and trying to sell it to the world? Is that New Zealand hops?
It's New Zealand hops in that case. It's whoever is licensed or owns the hop, basically. So New Zealand Hops owns Nectaron. They own the NZH 101, 102. They are there. It's their genetics. Plant and Food has sold, licensed, whatever you want to call it, the genetics to them. So we bred them, but then we assign them, or it's all legal.
I thought when the name switched to like the Maori versions of things and local areas and that sort of thing, it did bring sort of provenance and the things for overseas, especially for the hops.
Yep. I know with Nectaron, they wanted a hop they wanted a name that would celebrate Ron Beatson. Now, I don't know if I agree with Nectaron being the best name for that, but they also wanted something they could trademark, and that was difficult. They wanted to have a registered trademark on it, and that was really difficult because here's the thing: your plant patent lasts 20 years, but your registered trademark lasts forever. And so if you've got a registered trademark on it, even if it's your patent runs out, someone else can grow that hop, but they can't call it Nectaron, or they can't call it. What's the other one? I think Mutri might have one as well. There's a few of them, and that's a change that's been happening in all companies actually, I think. But yeah, they couldn't get Dr. Beatson or Dr. Ron or anything like that. They couldn't have any coverage on that.
You'd have to start thinking about how you're going to name your hop, mate. You could go like Temple Walker, you know.
I also know that the local iwi is less than impressed with them naming something that goes into beer after local area names.
Right.
So they got in a little bit of trouble for that, and I don't think they're going back there. So, but all those names, I don't know if you were aware that they tried to call Mutri Brooklyn, which, if you know where our research centre is, near Rewaka, but it's actually right opposite Brooklyn School, and they tried.
The Brooklyn Brewery put a nudge to that, didn't they?
They threatened to sue them.
Yeah, I'm surprised they backed down so quickly, because we can say, well, that's the name of the street.
Yeah,
nothing
exactly.
To do with your bloody brewery.
I know. It was even a different spelling. It's got.
Oh, really?
It's a different spelling of Brooklyn. So
yeah,
but
if they'd thought about it, they would have bought a shit ton of it.
Yep.
And done a hop named used after their own brewery. But
you're not the first person who've said that. Yeah, but it is what it is. Honestly, Mootrie's a hop that I think is underrated. And whenever we brew with it, it stands out like, it's quite different. Quite.
How you bring with it? Because I mean, it's a pretty aggressive hop. Where have you found that you're getting the sweet spot with it?
I've used it being just in the dry hop. I did a dry hop. This is at work. We cocked up. We didn't quite calculate things right, and we ended up with a dry hopping rate of about 20 grams per litre, and that beer was freaking amazing. I know that's a horribly high dry hopping rate, but it tasted good, and
Okay, which one was that? Moutray?
Moutray.
Moutray. Ah, okay.
That was
underrated.
That epic one I was talking about before, that epic trial.
Yeah, they did one called. They actually did one called Brooklyn. That was before the name changed.
Yeah.
Luke's used in some of his West Coast as a bittering hop too, but it's quite. I always find it's got a kind of funny aggressive bite when you use it. Really is an early boil hop. It's got a lovely clean bitterness on the front, but it gets a bit niggly on the back.
I don't use it in the boil at all. I think cohumulone's a bit high in it.
Yeah, it's got that kind of cohumulone bite.
Yeah.
It's high office, right?
Yeah, it is. It can be up to, I think they had some over 20 actually. Some of the farms actually got over 20 with it.
That's why some brewers, like, commercial, have struggled a bit with even the dry hop. Like some of them will dry hop it with it at a slightly lower temperature, or they'll, just to try and and also like the immersing. What's the immersing levels in Midori like? Are they pretty high or?
Top of my head, I don't know.
Yeah, that's okay. It's got that kind of aggressive grassy notes. I know some of them also pre-age hops and things like that.
Yeah.
Try and just dial it back a bit.
Yep. Yeah. I've had good luck with it in home brewing. I mean, I think when we did the brew with it, we had someone. What's the guy from Firestone Walker, Matt Brindleson, was in the brewery at work, and he tried it, and he's just like, "What the hell's in this one?" You could see the surprise on his face, and
same thing. If you impressed him, you give yourself a pat on the back.
He couldn't get enough of 102 either. That was the other one. NZH 102. He was amazed with. If it wasn't for COVID, I think he'd have been out. He comes out quite regularly during hop harvest, and it wasn't for COVID, he's out most years.
He's amazing. I mean, that guy's like, you ask any brewer who they think the best brewer in the world is, and it'll be Matt Brinson.
He's up there, yeah.
He's at Duval now.
Is he?
Oh, they got bought. Duval bought, but he's actually gone over there to spend time with
Yeah.
What's that? Why did they release an IPA then?
Probably.
What's the background on 990? Is it 9909?
9909.
Yeah.
Sorry.
What was that derived from, or what was the intention in that hop?
It was supposed to be it probably was a great replacement for a German noble hop. You'll be disappointed to hear that I think it's been axed from anything, so it's no longer going to be available.
So it was quite lemony.
Yeah, it got mixed reviews. I know that they really struggled to sell it. There's some brewers a couple of guys were sold on it. They were buying pretty much the entire supply of it for their Pilsner range, but it wasn't.
I think Eddie Line did a few beers with it, didn't they?
Who's that? Sorry,
Eddie Line.
Eddie Line did, yep. And there was someone else. Someone else was like, I don't know, it was Parrot Dog or one of the big, like, was really pushing it hard in their Pilsners. But the trouble was, it wasn't.
Parrot Dog used it in their Lyle Bay Pilsner for quite a bit.
Yeah, and that they really struggled to get. The trouble is that New Zealand hops really couldn't get any traction with it. It wasn't a high yielder. It didn't yield that well. Its harvest window wasn't great. There's a whole bunch of little issues with it.
So, sorry, what hop was this we're talking about?
Hort 9909. It never got beyond having a name.
Okay.
I believe they only ever had like 5 hectares total, and it was pretty low yielding. So I know one of the growers I know quite well. He got like 800 kgs per hectare, which is, when you're averaging 2 tons per hectare on most your rest of your varieties, that's pretty bad.
Do you do any like? Is there any drive or push to like look at New Zealand noble hop style varieties? Is really the main demand, the main pull is towards those real flavour forward.
The pull is towards real flavour forward. Yeah, the really bold hops. The noble types, I suppose, for want of a better term, we really can't compete with the Europeans on that.
Wakatu's still a great hop. I mean, because that's pretty much a how close to that in terms of its its story is it in terms of to actually to Hallertau?
Wakatu, I actually don't know.
I think that because that was originally like New Zealand Hallertau, and it's just
it was
because that's a lovely hop. I mean, it's quite different to, but still got that some of that sort of same.
9909 is either Hurstbrook Pure. I'm pretty sure it was Hurstbrook Pure. Was its either its mum or its grandmother. So yeah.
Cool. Because some of the noble hops, I mean, like New Zealand Liberty, I love. I mean, I know it's not New Zealand, it's not one of the planted food hop things, but so that's a cool hop that just flies way under the radar.
Yeah. Oh, that's one that you can buy for yourself too.
Exactly.
You can buy it as a plant to grow. And from what about Hop's point of view, it's one that I can vouch as he's got the right thing because we gave it to him. So, so I know he's got the right plant there. Yeah, and same with his Mount Hood.
Oh, has he got Mount Hood?
He's got Mount Hood and Liberty.
Bloody hell, Mount Hood's a cracking hop.
Because you know they're sisters, right?
Yeah, that's why I like. I mean, like I used to use Liberty when I couldn't get Mount Hood.
Right. Yeah.
So where did Mount Hood originate?
They're US hops.
Yeah. Yakima hops.
Yakima.
Well, Mount Hood's the big, massive mountain that sort of, sits over the, background of Yakima.
Kerry, just in terms of your trial brews with the dry hops, do you always do pellet or is it fresh hop as well?
It's cones. So it's not fresh hop, it's always dried, but it's cones. We don't pelletize. Right. With a seedling, we might only have, well, I wouldn't say if it was under 2 kgs wet, we wouldn't even bother brewing with it because it's not enough yield. But, 2 kgs wet's about half a kg dry total. That's the entire hop production for that seedling. And, so we don't bother pelleting them. We have a little pelleting plant, but unless you've got more than 5 kgs, it's not worth firing up. So, yeah.
We have done comparisons. Have you done comparisons where you've done, same hop leaf versus pellet, and what kind of characteristics do you sort of notice?
You're gonna hate this. It's hardly any difference at all. It really isn't.
No, I don't hate it. That's good.
Yeah, it actually there are, but they're not. They're subtle. They're quite subtle. It's not. I was expecting that the pelleted hops would be much more intense. You'd be getting more. In theory, you should have bigger surface area for the beer to interact with the lupulin and all that, but in reality, it doesn't seem to make a hell of a difference. Could just be that 10 grams per litre is, in the particular brew we're using, is over the thresh. You're sort of getting up above where your extraction levels are.
You didn't notice any other vegetable characters, some additional break or anything like that, or was it just?
No, not really.
Cool.
It's. Yeah, the only problem we've had is our pellets aren't quite as consistent. They're not formed quite as well as the commercial ones, so they tend to float and block things up a bit more. They don't settle to the bottom quite the same. Honestly, in my home brewing now, I use cones almost everything, particularly in the boil. Boil cones actually work better in my home brew system. I've got one of those little what do you call it? Bazooka screen things for my homebrew system, and the hops just act as the cone hops just act as a extra filter layer. They don't block it up. They just filter more stuff out. Whereas if you use pellets, they bloody things clog it up.
That was one of the questions I was sort of asking it for is like, the home brewing level. One of the biggest reasons that commercial brewers love pellets is yield.
Yeah,
it's also why they love cryo. But at a homebrew level, we're less
dry hopping with cones. They float.
Right.
They literally, you actually struggle to get them into the solution.
So do you want to bag them and weight them or something like
that?
Or?
Yeah, pretty much what I do. That's dry hopping. I still probably would, if I can find some pellets, I'll use pellets. It's every other point in the brew process, I use cones. Yeah, they're not
outside the brewery too, or, you know?
in our brewery at work. We use we because we're doing it in the kegs, and we purge the kegs. You know, we purge a shitload of CO2 through the kegs. We just pick them up and give them a bit of a shake. But you can't really do that with your 30 litre. Well, you probably could with a 30 litre fermenter, but yeah, it's not so easy. When you got three or 4 litres in a keg, it's not too hard to give a bit of a swirl around. But yeah, and
so
they
you
do.
didn't work out there, Kerry.
Well, I'm not. The guy who does the brewing this.
You've got what we all want. Someone to actually do the donkey work when it comes to brewing.
It is. Honestly, the one thing this job has done is made me not. I don't drink that many hoppy beers. Yeah, if I go to a bar and there's beers for sale, I tend to go Belgian ales, stouts.
Bring back the mold.
Yeah, anything that's. I love the hoppy beer. Don't get me wrong, I love hoppy beers, but I drink fucking pale ales every day, and you're drinking, well, not every day, but I'm drinking 20 odd pale ales a week. On a Tuesday or a Thursday, I'm probably trying 12 hops, 12 beers, and it's not a lot. I admit, I've got to the point where I should just spit them out now. I don't even swallow it. You don't even drink the thing. It's just swirl it around your mouth, give a bit of a taste, and then spit it out again. Because it's
Hey, Kerry, just on the brewing, like on the alpha acid and everything. Yep. If you're making like a hoppy beer or whatever, how significant is it, the hop or the amount of alpha acid? Is it like a 60-minute boil just to get that bitterness that you need in the bulk of the beer? Does it really matter if it's Pacific Gem, Pacific Jade, or Magnum or whatever? If you're going to be adding late addition and dry hops as well?
That's what we were talking about before with Dave. The cohumulone will have an effect. So beers of higher cohumulone have what they describe as a harsh bitterness. That'd really be the only thing I'd look for. Other than that, yeah, higher alpha and high alpha, low cohumulone. I think that's one of the reasons Pacific Jade's popular. It's reasonably low cohumulone and reasonably high alpha. Yeah. If you want to ask for numbers, I'd say cohumulone under 30, preferably. If you can get under 25 is better, but I've never actually done the test where I go take a high cohumulone one, a low cohumulone, and basically brew the same beer and see what the difference is.
Do we have access as homebrewers to that information? I just see an alpha acid.
You'll have the alpha acid level,
isn't it? Yeah.
The alpha acid levels should be on the bag.
Yeah, I have that.
I don't know. Well, cohumulone will be available on. If you Google it, it should come up. The hop cohumulone.
The various hop websites usually have all that stuff.
Beersmith probably. If Beersmith or whatever software you use, probably.
It's on the NZ Hops website.
Yeah. I just know.
To batch though.
It'll vary batch to batch, but it'll be within that ballpark. And that's all. The alpha acids itself, you need to know the actual batch because that's what's giving you the bitterness.
Share that if you want. That's like for Pacific Jade.
Yep.
From the NZ Hops thing. So you can see then, like the alpha acids, the cohumulone, total oils, myrcene levels, generally the other thing you have a bit of a look at. Sometimes people like farcene, but I'm
trying to get them to put geraniol and linalool on there.
Get on the biotransformation bandwagon. That'll, because you guys got some interesting
try and
stuff
get them to spell myrcene right. That'd be good.
Yeah. No, man, it's hip.
That is some good spotting.
It's not myrcene, it's myrcene.
It's a disability. That stuff just jumps out at me like it's glowing.
Yeah. But I will say that I think
anti-dyslexic, Julian.
Oh, I don't know what it is, but honestly,
I do believe different hops actually have quite a different texture and not flavour.
It's a mouthfeel.
Absolutely, and I think that's the one area that I see a lot of the big American brewers pay a ridiculous amount of attention, as New Zealand commercial brewers tend to just IBUs, just whatever their base hop is. As we were talking to Tim Cummins, who's the head of brewing Modern Times, and he's saying every year they'll have a set range of their bittering hops, and they'll do prototype beers, and pick which of their 2 or 3 they're going to use as bittering. And that's pretty Stone do the same thing, sort of near Sierra Nevada. And I think, especially when you got those big, West Coast IPAs, that bitterness was such a massive impact.
Yeah.
That was really important, and why their beers have just got that sort of real structural, clean elegant bitterness is quite different from New
I
Zealand.
think that's why Pacific Jade became popular in New Zealand. Is a clean bittering hop.
Yeah, it's real safe.
That's what we use.
Trusty go-to.
It's in the pilot brewery at work. Everything is bittered with Pacific Jade, and then dry hopped with the the whatever the experimental hop is. So it's not.
I find it cleans off as well on the palates. Some of the things like Magnum and things like that. Once you get up to sort of 50, 60 IBUs, I find it can linger a bit. Like I think the big thing for me that like you try a lot of the real good American West Coast IPAs, and the bitterness is strong, it's really robust, and then it just kind of cuts at the right point and dies out. As I think Jade can linger a little bit, but at low levels, it's such a safe hop to use.
It's definitely. I was just going to say we did a tasting this week, and we taste them blind, so I don't know what they are. I mean, I made the list, but there's 800 hops in this list. I don't remember what hops coming week to week. And I got to the last one this week. I was like, "Fuck, that's got like a red, winey kind of grape flavor." Did all my scoring, went back, handled the label. It's fucking Nelson Selvin. I was like, this is a really good hop. What the hell is it? Oh, shit. Which is good because they actually are showing what they, what you'd expect. The sort of flavors you'd expect out of them are coming through. So, yeah.
So, Kerry, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but you, before this, we had a conversation where you said you might better share some things with the brew club at some point.
Share some, well, as in...
You might have to stop the record button there, Reese.
I could probably try and hook you up with some NZH 101, 102. I'll see what I can do. I don't promise anything. That's as good as I can do. And whenever something else gets released, I can probably try, but
that's all we're asking for, mate.
NZH 101 and 102 were sold through the League of Brewers at one point, but they had a very small amount of them, and then once they sold out, they didn't get any more. 101, they've only got a hectare of it, and there's breweries in the States that are buying, there's breweries over there that want to buy 10 tons of it, so they're pushing that one.
We're happy with 103 when it comes out, so just keep us in.
Yep.
Remember your roots.
Oh, definitely. I will see what I can do. I might have to ship some to Mythica Brewing to, and he can distribute them to the.
Yeah.
Trouble is, it might be like a 5 kg pack or something like that.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jeff.
Kerry, you haven't mentioned anything about diseases. I think of when I first went to the UK. They were really struggling with Goldings and Fuggles with some kind of wilt. Do we have those issues here?
No, we don't. And that is one of our big advantages New Zealand has over, Northern Hemisphere, definitely. Australia doesn't have them either. I don't know about South Africa and Argentina, but there's downy mildew and powdery mildew. They're the two we really, really don't want in New Zealand. And they are... they just don't exist here. We don't spray. Honestly, the only thing that gets hops shouldn't be sprayed in New Zealand. They're not sprayed for any pests at all. The odd grower will spray for two-spotted mite if they get their predatory mite program wrong. So what they normally do is they put out these predator mites, and if they get it right, the predator mites will just clean up all of the two-spotted mite, and means they don't have to spray. If they get it wrong, they forget, they're too cheap, which is stupid because it costs them all to spray. But anyway, they might spray. But if you look at hops from the US and Europe, they spray the shit out of them with fungicides and whatnot for downy and powdery mildew. And they did some research to say, oh no, it doesn't survive the brew process. They only looked at them in the boil. They didn't look at them in the dry hopping side of things. So
also, you don't have heat to nature,
yeah. So I'm a bit.
So what's the story with? Because for a while, there used to be like organic hop.
Yep.
Was grown, and there was a.
There's a little bit of organic hop still growing, not a lot.
But what's the difference if you're not spraying? Then what makes it
they
organic or
spray?
not?
They use herbicides still. So when I say herbicides, they spray the weeds around the hops, and so some of them might use Roundup, or Roundup's probably not the one, but some other. They use pretty benign herbicides because they don't want to kill the hop; they just want to kill the other weeds. But yeah, the organic guys don't even do that, and the fertilizers they use have to be certified organic and stuff like that. It's really you talk to the organic. One of the organic growers that I know, there's only two of them. They basically only have a tiny part of their farm organic because it's actually such a palaver to do. They really only do it because there's a few breweries that they're friends with that want to do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't bother.
But at the end of the day, I mean, your malts, there's not that much malt that's organic. Your yeast, I mean, how much of that stuff is going to be organic that you can actually make an organic beer?
Yeah, I know.
I think there's also a big difference too, but like, I mean, for me, I like the demarcation of like free range and organic. Like, you've almost got this kind of middle ground, which is like where I think a lot of our produce in New Zealand is at, where it's not necessarily gone right to the organic threshold, but compared to typical practices, I mean, free range means that there's minimal intervention.
Exactly. Yeah, New Zealand hops in New Zealand are way less. There's way less intervention, less spraying. I mean, I've only ever seen spray unit driving around one hop farm in New Zealand, ever.
I mean, goats would walk up and down the aisles quite easily, wouldn't they? The goats wouldn't need a bloody hop plant, would they? They'd probably eat anything.
No, they put sheep in them. They actually do graze sheep under the hops. Once they get up above 3 meters, they'll chuck a mob of sheep in with them and graze sheep under them, and they just got to remember to pull them out. Yeah, it keeps the weeds under control.
These like these baby doll sheep.
No,
little short ones.
Anything. Interestingly, really sort of funny. Obviously, some hops are better flavors than better tasting than others because you go along. They eat the leaves. They eat the leaves off the hops, and it actually helps them control. So when the hops, you train 2 hop binds up each string. Well, if you don't have any grazing or anything in there, the hops will just keep putting out binds, and they'll keep trying to grow up. So the sheep keep that under control. But there was one variety we were walking through this grower's property, and it's like, what have you done there? The sheep haven't gone to those. And he said, yeah, the sheep won't eat them. There's like a really obvious line where his varieties changed because the sheep just would not go into that block. Well, wouldn't, they'd nibbled on them and gone, no, screw this, there's something wrong with those, and moved on. Yeah. Well, that was kind of funny. I've also heard stories.
What do the sheep know that we don't?
Hey, it's one of the standout hops. So, yeah, I've heard. In the old days, they used to be pretty rough and ready, and the odd sheep would get tangled up in the hop vines, and they'd be running them through the hop machines and be rotten sheep in them. But that doesn't happen these days. They've got some pretty strict quality controls they have to meet for their hop harvest. Certainly the cooperative guys they get penalised for failings in different areas. They've all moved to compostable string now. So when I first moved down here, the one thing that got me with hops is they use this fucking nylon string that doesn't break down, would be really horrendous for the environment, basically. But they're all quite quickly moving to this compostable string. It's more expensive, but
it was on Country Calendar last week with
the
capsicum growers.
Yep, same stuff. Yeah, and they just chop it up and compost it with their compost, and it's way better. Some other guys are using coconut husk. The coconut husk is what they use in the States. We call it coir, and that's what they use in the States. But it's not where it hasn't been used here, and to get hold of it was really difficult. Whereas this other stuff was actually developed. It's made by a company just south of Whangarei. So
what's it made from?
Don't ask me. Cornstarch, maybe. I really don't know. All I know is it breaks down. Not going to litter the oceans with microplastics. Yeah, or they're just not burning it, which was the other way. They pull it all out and just burn the bloody stuff. It's like, God damn it. Yeah.
So, Kerry, do you still find time to brew at home, or because back in the day, you and Jeff used to have your plant together and used to brew together?
Yep. So I always had. Towards before I left Auckland, I had my own little system. I got a little homemade. What is it? 25-30 litre system, and I brew occasionally. I don't brew that much. I'll be honest. I'll go through periods where I'll go, oh shit, I need a bit of beer, and I'll brew something else. But yeah, my last one actually, I brewed the same beer, no dry hop. It's literally got a bittering hop and a little bit of late hop, and then fermented with 3 different yeasts, US05, M41 and M47, 2 Belgian ale yeasts. And yeah, that's come out really nice. It's the whole idea was I was just curious to see what the yeast how the yeast would perform. It's a simple.
Low IBU beers.
Yeah. It's be 25 maybe IBUs, 6%. One of them dried out a lot more than the others. So the M41 Mangoes Jack's Belgian Ale was a lot. So you can't see. Was a lot.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to move from this room into the lounge now because I'm being kicked out of here because the daughter's got someone over for a sleepover, and but I should be able to, if this goes to plan, I should just be able to unplug the laptop and move.
She's got bigger.
Yeah, she's
came from my neighbour.
Right.
That hop originally that she got from something, and yeah, so.
Yeah.
But knowing the sort of origin of hops is a bit more useful. If you know you're growing NZ Cascade, at least you could have a bit more ideas about what it could be as opposed to what its approximate IBUs were.
Just on that topic, Kerry, you got anything to contribute? Because New Zealand Cascade and Taiheki and US Cascade, they are supposed to be sort of, same propagation source, but, Taiheki is so different. What kind of causes that from a breeding or growing perspective? Is he not there?
He might have moved into the room that doesn't have
he's gone. Right.
He's refusing.
Sorry, I went to get beer, so I missed that bit.
There must have been too IP sensitive, David, but you've been censored.
The same hop over 4 weeks, and the middle 2 weeks tasted very, 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 very similar. It was the first week was not much, and the last week was garlic onion, but chemistry and everything. The middle week was the middle 2 weeks. So it was middle 2 weeks, basically would be early in normal harvest now and a slightly late normal harvest, and really early and a really late one were obvious extremes. We didn't get that much difference. I think certain brewers would like one, certain brewers would like the other. That's where I think, when you were talking about batch selection, I think there are people out there who'd like to do that. But the reality is you've got to be buying a fair chunk of hop to make it worthwhile for the producer, basically.
Well, I think it was the NZ Hop was a 2 ton minimum per variety or something like that, where they'll do selection or something.
Yeah, and I know it's actually a pain in the ass for them, from what I understand. But if they're selling them, if that's what they're selling, then if that's what they need to do to sell them, then they have to do that. It's what the customer's demanding. I know some of the other grower groups are much bigger on batch selection. That's sort of what they target. But then all their stuff.
Also, I think it adds a lovely wankiness and romance to the whole brewing process too. Plus, they get an excuse to go travel. Yeah,
and there's also the fact that a lot of those other guys only have one farm to work from. Whereas New Zealand Hops, if you look at New Zealand Hops, there's 26 farms in that group, and the farms down in the Motueka area, will almost always be a tiny bit earlier than the farms up in Tapawera. Just in this case, I think it's slightly earlier harvest, because Tapawera can get frosts in the end of harvest. They only get frosts, whereas Motueka won't. You won't get a frost until sometime in late April. So there's variation in that area. Then you start getting into is there terroir involved? I'll say that's so the terroir of the actual genetic is so subtle. It's mostly around how the guys harvested them, how the processing. There's so many variations in there, and then the brewers can use them in so many different ways. Yeah. We always get people asking, is there terroir like in wine grapes? And I don't think it's comparable.
Yeah, that's what I heard. The question I asked before, when I didn't realise that you weren't with us, was that
my daughter unplugged the router because
that's okay.
really helpfully
Was NZ Cascade versus US Cascade. I mean, because they're the NZ Cascade is a propagated off the US. At the end of the day, quite a different hop.
One thing I'd say is you're never ever going to try them side by side properly because they're always 6 months. One's always going to be 6 months older than the other,
right?
And that's probably enough to have a slight difference. I wouldn't have thought it was a huge difference. I know this is being recorded. I probably should be careful what I say here. I have a suspicion that what we have in New Zealand isn't exactly the same as US Cascade. We got something from the USDA that they called US Cascade. We've never done a DNA test to find out if it is. Yeah, that's about as much as I can say. I know when I was over there,
different farms in the US have got quite different, different growing regions have got quite different instances of Cascade.
You think that Yakima's Yakima's like someone growing hops down in bloody Bluff, basically, equivalent for New Zealand. We're Oregon, maybe Oregon would be halfway up the South Island, and yeah, we're actually about the same as Northern California, where we are based here. Hence why the original hops that we had came from it was Californian Lake Cluster. It was, yeah.
So this is all sort of latitude based.
Yes. Yeah. So as you move towards away from the equator, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I think there's definitely the Cascade, the New Zealand Cascade appears to be the same in area. The chemistry is slightly different, but as I said, it could just be with different latitude. There's a chance it's a different plant, but there's actually something they got the wrong thing when they transplanted it. But don't know.
Is it hard to DNA test then to compare the plants, or not?
Not really.
You guys don't have the equipment, or?
Oh, we've got the equipment. We've got the people in the company with the expertise. It's more of a priorities, actually. Is it a priority? No, I'm not too worried about it. I don't really care if New Zealand Cascade and the US Cascade are the same or different.
Well, it's called Taiheki now, so it doesn't matter, does it?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, it's a router unplugger.
Sorry?
It's a router unplugger.
Yes. Yeah. Then my computer wouldn't hook back up, so I'm on my phone now. But
we can tell you're very portrait.
Oh, really?
Hey, Kerry, I got a question. I was chatting to a mate just a couple of days ago about, I don't know, I think the story went that he had a friend who runs a home brew shop somewhere, and he was saying that it's getting harder and harder to get New Zealand hops into the home brew shops, and it's nearly going to become, in the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months, going to become impossible for home brew shops to get New Zealand hops. Is that, you know anything about that, or? I
don't know anything about that. I know that they're exporting a lot, but I would have thought if they're willing, if they put in an order, I assume they just put an order like a brewer does, and they they are forward contracting a lot more now. So you need to say next year I want 20 kgs or 200 kgs or 20 tons of whatever variety. Otherwise, they're not.
Okay. That's been going on for a while. I think.
I don't see why they'd get any different deals than a commercial brewer.
Yeah.
I think the issue there was that particularly plants like Nectaron, they only want to sell in the pre-sealed 100-gram packs, whereas the home brewer shops want to buy them in bulk and split them. But that's pretty much been stopped with Nectaron. I believe it's also been stopped with a lot of the new varieties, which is, theoretically should improve the flavour of the hop. but it'll reduce the margins of the homebrew shops. So it's probably more about money than anything else.
Yeah.
No,
Yes.
quality, William.
Yeah, but homebrew shops make a shitload more money by buying a bulk pack and breaking it down and selling it. And I mean, it's half the reason why homebrewers get shit hops.
Yeah. I mean, unless the homebrew shop's vacuum packing them with a vacuum packer that actually does nitrogen flushing, I would say they're probably, it's better than nothing. And also store them at 0 degrees, store them in a freezer. I mean, that's where we store our hops at work, is in a freezer. I know New Zealand hops, when the bales obviously don't have a freezer big enough to hold their bales, but it's still at 0 degrees. And yeah, I walked into home brew shops and they've just got them sitting in not even say it's a fridge. It's a pretty, not the best storage.
Yeah, cool. I think actually William sort of semi-answered that. I think that was the story was around some of those hops that they only want to come out in 100-gram bags. So I think that was probably more behind the story than actually getting access to it.
I don't know why they don't just do a kg bag and then the home brew shop, at least that's less to split up. Not doing 5 kgs at a time. You're only doing kg. But anyway, I'm not part of New Zealand
but
hops.
there's people in this group who would buy a 250-gram bag of, for example, Nectron from a home brew shop. So perhaps the whole ideas of bag sizes need to be
relative to
we're talking to the wrong end of the neck here, but
hey, put together, call yourself a commercial brewery and it's a club, and buy a bag of hops. Buy a 5 kg bag if you want.
I don't know. But you're right. But the whole nitrogen thing and the splitting up, I mean, that's where it all goes to custard, right?
Yeah, it is. I'll have a talk to someone at New Zealand Hops and see what I can. Maybe for the club, I might be able to organise something. But
we're happy to do Zoom calls. We've got nothing else to do.
I'm just thinking I can maybe hook you up with some hops. I know promises. This really is no promises.
We use hops on a pretty regular basis, so
yeah, I know.
And we appreciate it.
But you sort of got to look at the scale too. I mean, I know they get orders for 10 tons for some hops, and that the home brew scene in New Zealand would it probably be, I don't know, I'm guessing half a ton of, if you're really generous, of some of the varieties. Even like Nectaron or Rewalker, I would imagine there's not that shit, 500 kgs is a lot of hops. Whereas I'll get a brewery that orders 10 tons of them. You can sort of see why they sell. Their priority's not really the home brew. I understand, it would be great if it was, but yeah. I don't know. I'm not saying I agree with it. I just think that's one of the reasons I actually think homebrewers probably get the floor sweepings anyway. I think from everywhere. I think the stuff that comes into New Zealand from bloody overseas in general, and that's even to the commercial guys, is probably unless they're doing lot selections, is probably the floor sweepings and the stuff that didn't quite pass the grade. Stuff.
Often the stuff that the homebrew shops buy is what brewery surplus that's put on the spot market. I know with the NZ hops, they do the small bags last, and that's what you'd expect. They do the 20 kilo bags for their big producers. They go offshore first, then they'll do that because they've got to reconfigure their machinery each time to do the different bag sizes too. So they step it down, and it's not that they're using floor scrapings. It's just that they do the 100-gram bags last, so they're the last bales to come out of the thing. But they're not shit. They're just.
No, I'm saying, I'm not.
I know what you mean with the American ones.
Word. I'm just saying this. I certainly, some of the hops I've had over the years, particularly the New Zealand US hops you buy in New Zealand, they're pretty average.
I think they used to be pretty good when there was a period there when they had that reciprocal arrangement that NZ hops had with, and there was some really good hops going back and forth. And then there was about some interim where it wasn't. But now YCH are coming in with chrome malt. I think they're pretty good.
Yeah, they're probably going all right. Yeah, I agree actually. I've got a lot of my hops from Brewers Co-op, and they used to, I don't know if they still do, have them in those Systema boxes.
No, they still do. Yeah.
So Kerry, how do you know if you're buying a hop from the home brew shop, how do you know whether it's past it or not, or whether it's?
I wouldn't buy anything other than this season's hops. Yeah, they'll have they usually, well, they should have a date on the bag. I know the bags New Zealand hops produce have a like 2021, 2020 harvest written on them. That's about as good as you can do when you're buying them from the homebrew shop. I don't think you could go much without opening the bags up and having a smell. But I don't think they're going to like you doing that, the 100 gram bag, and going, no, I don't want that one. You know what I mean?
But ask them about their process and don't buy anything that isn't backpacked.
Yeah. That's probably the simplest way to do it.
Because yeah, I mean, I started buying hops and stuff from Brewers Coop because it was so handy. I was doing real small batches, like at order specific quantities. But then I did think about that. I think earlier this year or either last year, I was thinking, well, you know, how fresh are those hops with opening and closing them 100 times?
Yeah. One thing I'd say is I wouldn't stress it. There'll be people who will disagree with me, but for your bittering hops, I wouldn't stress about it as much. But for your hops using your dry hop, I'd be a bit more paranoid about it. That would be my generic take on it, and that's putting a lot of my home brewing biases into it too, to be honest.
That's a good point.
You know, your bittering hops are, as long as they're not horribly old, probably still got the alpha acids, reasonable alpha acid. And, the alpha acids do taper off over time, but if you store, I think if they store, as long as they're stored in a fridge or got 0 to -20 sort of temperature, they should be fine.
That's also why a lot of the commercial brewers that they don't brew to a certain formula. It's kind of like, well, I chuck a 5 kilo bag in, or I chuck a 20 kilo bag in, because they plan to use a whole bag in my batch, right?
Yep.
Whatever that batch is.
Yeah. Be my guess. Well, I imagine they do that. I know there's a brewery cooperative in the US that actually buy. They're all little breweries. They're probably, when I say little breweries, they're probably not small breweries, but each of them probably only using half a ton to a ton of hops each. But between them, they can order 20 tons of Nectaron, and then they basically take it over to get that in the US, and they'll split it up and things like that. So there's breweries doing that, big commercial breweries doing that sort of thing out of the US.
But they'll be getting them in 20 kilo bags though, right?
Probably, and then they'll divvy up those 20 kg bags around their brewery, their co-op members. So
yeah,
and they're not just buying. They'll be buying 20 tons of one hop and 10 tons of another and 5 tons of another. And some breweries won't want all. So it was actually, from what I understood, it was a way that they could buy a whole lot of different. They're effectively acting as their own distributor. Yeah.
A smart idea. I don't know why, even in New Zealand, I don't know why breweries don't club together in order to get over the threshold to be able to do hop selection and things like that.
Yeah.
I do think there's quite a difference in terms of, I mean, even this year I did some stuff, with Luke Nicholson, and his rubs and things like that, and different hop sources. And, the difference between, hop selection hops and then, your spot hops and then your general blends was quite extraordinary.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the one of the nicest Nelson Cell bins I've ever smelt was actually, on paper, would have been harvested a week early, but it was just amazing. But that was 1 year. And the next year, you'd have to do a selection to get that same thing. It's really not. It varies every year. It is a bit like. In this case, it's a bit like wine, where you have seasonal variation, and I think you have effectively vintages of hops. There are some years where Nelson Sauvin probably is not as intense as other years. There was a couple of years. Was it this year? It was this season just been. It was quite a wet summer, and the plants grew really well. And everyone went, "Oh, this is lovely. We've got big yield." The plants weren't stressed, and there's a theory that one of the things that helps the hops secrete oils into their the lupulin glands is a bit of stress. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but anecdotally, the hops were less intense. Just the chemist that does our testing in the lab was convinced that the hops didn't smell as strong this year as they have for other years.
So, because it was that guy Chris from Lincoln. What's his Chris?
Weinfeld.
Yeah, who did that presentation at Harpy on that in terms of hop stress and they were testing even plants releasing pheromones when they're under stress to impact other plants.
Yeah.
And so we're laughing at the concept of you go and beat the living shit out of one plant in order to scare the others into actually performing better.
Yeah, I must have been there, but I must have heard that.
It's a bit behind this guy. He was applying a lot of wine research to hops. He didn't disclose that at the time.
What he's doing. He's sort of our competitor, so I've got to be a little bit careful what I say. But, he's a nice guy and pretty smart. I think it's sometimes that we get droughts, dry years and wet years. And a wet year, as I said before, as long as you keep the water up to the hops, realistically they'll grow. And some of these dry years, I think they just get a little bit stressed, and that's when the flavour comes through more. But I don't know. I don't know for certain. But you'd almost have to do year-to-year testing, and it's really hard to do because you can't keep a batch of hops for this year and compare them to next year's batch, because by that time this year's batch is old. And
you're saying like get the latest, get 2021. But if you're saying that effectively last year was quite wet, then this year's harvest is effectively from a wet season, which effectively the flavour is less, although they're fresher.
That's
Am
my
I confusing
theory.
that?
I don't know if this is true or not. This is just my gut feel. Yeah. And it was not just me, actually. It was the guy who does the chemistry in our chemistry lab. He was, because he does commercial testing for, a lot of the commercial hop growers in New Zealand. And he was saying, his gut feeling, it was nothing more than gut feeling, was that the hop aroma intensity this year was down. And but in saying that, there's been some lovely beers. Well, it probably just means you got to put a little bit more hop in, a few more hops in the beer, really.
Because in there you got the question. You're like, well, is a 2020 hop, which is potentially a year old, but from a dry, versus 2021.
But it's not. They don't. The trouble is the chemicals don't break down linear in a straight line. So
they're not linear.
Yeah, and it's also some chemicals break down faster than others.
Yeah.
So
I think Kerry makes a really good point. Like in terms of you got a varied supply chain where you don't know about the handling and anything else like that, and that can be pretty varied. Fresh cuts through a lot of sins. Basically,
the fresher your hops are, the better they should be. It doesn't account for the fact that maybe you got a batch that was picked late or something like that. It's never, unless you're doing batch selection, you're not going to get around that. But that's unlikely. Very few growers would. I don't think any grower would do that. And it's one of the advantages of buying. I don't want to advertise for them because I really shouldn't be. But with New Zealand hops, at least as a cooperative, they've got 26 growers and they blend all their hops together. So you're getting they kind of average out all that sort of stuff. All the differences between the growers. Obviously they're not mixing the whole lot together, but it's just been impossible. But they definitely blend them together to try and average out the quality along the line. And from a smaller brewer perspective, that's probably a benefit because you're not going to get that year to year. Well, that'll should average out everything over the harvest. And I think am I making sense when I say that?
Yeah, more consistent.
Absolutely. I think the whole idea with going with that homogeneous approach was that it was an even playing field.
Yeah.
Like the Americans, the winners, the guys who've got first pick of the thing, they win.
Yeah.
And you that kind of bell curve where everyone sort of the winners and the losers and everything else and thing. And I think New Zealand hops approach does create more of a flat line.
Yeah. They are definitely doing batch selection now, but as I said, big breweries, not little ones. I don't know. Yeah, much more than that.
I got told it was a 2 ton minimum for one single variety to do batch selection for NZ hops.
Okay.
This is a fair amount of hops. There's not that many breweries in New Zealand that are doing 2 ton of one variety.
No. Yeah. When you look at those bales, each of those, I don't know if anyone's seen wool bales, or hop bales are the same size as wool bales. pretty much. Each bale's only about 120 kgs in it, so you're thinking,
shit, that's a lot.
There's a fair bit of hop goes in. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That they've got, every year at the end of the year they've got 1,000 tons of hops. That's just about 2,000 bales. No, sorry, 20. Yeah, anyway.
So, Kerry, how long is it till Ron actually retires then? Must be getting close.
I can say Christmas. Unofficially, I don't think it's been announced anywhere, so don't put this anywhere. But
we might have blown that one.
Yeah,
Kerry,
keep that quiet.
Kerry, you were talking about the picking periods earlier, and that's of interest to me. Just as a hop grower, I just sort of feel them, and there's various descriptions of the amount of paperiness that to pick them, but there must be a lot more science involved for the big hop growers.
The commercial guys will use a mixture of dry matter measurements, which is actually, well, if you've got a relatively accurate set of scales, you probably need 2 decimal places minimum, and it's in grams. You weigh it when it's wet, and then you chuck it in the oven for, well, we do them overnight at 60 degrees or 80 degrees, pull them out and weigh them then. So you want to be around 20% dry matter. So working out your weight, once your water's gone, your dry matter should be 20% of the total weight when they were wet. 22%, 22 to 23% is your sweet spot. You'd get away probably 24 to 20% is probably the, in that area. And then the really big growers tend to look at chemistry as well. So they'll look at alpha acids, alpha beta ratio, I think there's a few other little things they look at as well. But in our orchard at Research Orchard, we do what you do. We walk around, we just feel the hops. So we can give it a rub, a bit of smell. Yep, it's about right. We know roughly, and we'll chuck the odd ones through a dry matter test and double check ourselves. And usually we're within the ballpark. So
when I was at Mac Farms for one of the NH test things, and he showed me a split test thing where you grab the hop off the vine, and if you can split it down its shaft, he reckons that it's sort of at its peak then. Yeah.
Oh, Brent is a great grower. I assume you're talking about Brent McGlashan. Yeah, I agree. That'll be his way of doing it. It's probably right. I mean, shit, your family's been, it's their 5th generation hop grower. Everybody has to, every grower has their own little intricate way. Someone told me the other day, you look at the ends of the hop, and when they start going white, that's when to pick it. And there's multiple ways. I mean, the way they usually do it commercially, and all those big boys, they'll tell you all this stuff, but they'll all still do a dry matter test. They'll take 100 hop cones off a plant, just a handful really, and then a couple of handfuls of hops, dry them, and then see what the weight difference is. So you could actually do it at home if you wanted to, if you didn't mind thinking out your house.
With that test, what are you actually measuring then?
The dry matter is literally just how much moisture is in it. So as they ripen up,
you want it to dry first.
Yeah, so as they ripen up, they get drier.
Right.
So if they're underripe, they'll be 18, 15, 18, maybe 15 to 18 or 15 to 20% dry matter. So when you chuck them in the oven, you chuck them at 80 degrees and just leave them overnight. Well, we leave them overnight. You probably get away with a lot shorter, really. And they dry out. And what you're weighing at the start is the hop, the dry material plus the water. After you take them out, all you're weighing is the dry material that's left behind. Then you just work out the percentage of that dry material.
But wouldn't 5 hours compared to 8 actually make a difference?
Sorry?
Wouldn't 5 hours compared to 8 make a difference?
5 hours.
Time.
Oh, no, because you just want to dry. You want to drive up all moisture. So you got to weigh. What you do is you weigh them fresh. So you weigh them as soon as you get them out of the field, pick them off the plant. You check them on the scales, weigh them. and then you take that batch and chuck them in the oven. What we do is we actually sit them in a little tray. We know the way to the tray. They go in there, then that whole tray and everything goes in the oven, then they come back out and going. It's about the simplest way to measure dry matter in a hop. And it could be done at home, other than the fact your house would stink. And your oven would, if you're single and don't have a family, I think you'd be fine. If you have a partner, and they don't appreciate the smell of hops in their kitchen, yeah, good luck to you. Honestly, I would just, the way Brent said, when you tear it apart, it's probably about right. If they feel papery, they feel dryish, that's coming out. Ron Beatson's one is the so you got the bracts and the bracteoles. When they're all, that's the little petals, not petals, but effectively look like petals. When they change, one of them changes color. I think it's the bracteoles go slightly lighter color than the bracts.
1 out of 4 or something.
Yeah, and that's when they're ripe. That's his theory. I just walk around with them. You can kind of tell the color changes. They start yellowing a bit, going a little bit yellow. And that's how I learned when I first got here, was you just look for these yellow ones. I still have to rub them and give a feel, and I like to smell them anyway. It's good to, except by the time you've done a couple of hundred in the orchard, you're like, okay, they all smell the same now.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing, isn't it? When you come down to perception.
But yeah, that would be the way. Honestly, if I was growing at home, or for you guys, I'd just go on. Does it feel right? The reality, rub a few. If they smell good, they're probably right. Particularly if you're dry hopping with them.
Well, that was one of the things that for me that was actually a real eye-opener, like doing a hot rub with some of the really good, yank brewers that came down. I sort of kept on running into them, so I actually ended up forming some relationships. So I'd actually go down and do a rub with them. And you kind of see there's just been this mystical science where I'm thinking, oh, wow, they're smelling this, they're picking that. But a lot of the time, they're actually doing a process of exclusion. They're looking for stuff that doesn't have like garlicky, oniony characters and more vibrancy of flavor and everything else like that. And it was actually wasn't as, I didn't feel quite so bad after that, because I'm thinking, how the hell are you getting, I'm just getting, and yeah, they are, but it's more that exclusion character that they're after.
Yep. Yeah. No, I agree. That's probably exactly what they're doing, is excluding the cheesy, garlicky, older oxidized hops. And of course, the next brewer will come along and he'll love those ones, so he'll take them, and yeah.
And the beers are the same.
I reckon a lot of the times the differences are pretty subtle, but yeah.
Well, you were saying before, there's so many chemical compounds and so much stuff going on in hops that it's not even understood by science. So that
science is starting to get a hang of it, but we're a long way from knowing everything that's going on in hops. The files are the newest area that everyone's interested in, and honestly, I don't think anybody's measuring them really accurately. Now, we've had people come and say, "Oh, why don't you guys measure thiols?" And I actually said, "Well, we're probably cheaper just to use our noses, because they're better detectors anyway, and do it through the brewery."
I like that answer.
Yeah. I said we can put 800 hops through the brewery. I won't be able to afford to put 800 hops through a thiol test. I'll tell you that right now. It's probably $1,000 a test, and we haven't got that money for that. As I said, there's a lab in France that claims they can do it, and supposedly have pretty good track record. But yeah,
aren't those? Well, I was sort of thinking of sniffer dogs, but aren't there electronic versions of sniffer dogs that pick up compounds and do essentially a spectrum analysis of scents?
They exist, but they're very specific. They're basically electronic things. They're specific to certain scents. So you have to design them for each scent. And I don't think anyone's done hops yet, because hops are, although it's high value in some industry, we value them a lot. Actually, in the scheme of things, hops are pretty value of the whole entire world hop hop crop is probably less than, I don't know, I wouldn't want to guess, but I'd say less than a couple of $1 billion.
People have been down $5, Kerry. Jesus.
If you look at New Zealand's 1% of the world's hop crop, and maybe even 2% now. We've gone up a bit, but and if you think about it, we've maybe less than $100 million industry, the hop industry. Well, I think it's less than 50 actually. So you think about it like that. It's not actually that. It's profitable per hectare, but it's not. To put that money into investing in something like that, you really want to be in some of those crops that are worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Unfortunately.
What do you know about
sorry, you go.
The hop research in Australia? Because we don't actually hear about that much here.
The hop research in Australia, well, I've never met them. Ron is reasonably good friends with them, and they're owned by which one is it? It's either Bathurst or are owned by one of the big hop houses anyway, and so they don't target. They're a bit different in that they target hops with really wide harvest windows. That's why there's only 2 or 3 hops grown in Australia, really, because they went for all their production Galaxy pretty much, I believe, other than a little bit of a couple other little things. But yeah, I don't know much about them. I've actually met more of the US breeders than I know the Australian ones. I've met Jason Peralt and a few of the guys over in the US, but never US. The Australian guys are much more. They keep themselves a lot more. Was hoping to get over there next season, but that's probably unlikely.
No, we'll be vaxxed by then.
Well, I am vaxxed, but are they going to open the borders up by then? Probably not.
Oh no, Australia's November. You're right, mate.
Yeah. So anyway.
So do the is there any genetic engineering with any of this? It's very
not commercially that I'm aware of.
Kind of traditional, right? You literally take pollen from one and the other, and that's how you make the crosses. Is it? You literally kind of,
basically. Honestly, that's what happens in just about every crop in the world.
Okay.
Even the ones they genetically modify, you still have to do that.
Right.
So they'll genetically modify something, and then you've got to breed it into something that's actually commercially viable. I know this because for the first 15 years of my career, I was a genetic engineer, and that's generally the way it goes. But hops, no, I don't know of any genetically modified hops out there. I know there's in the US there's some genetically modified yeasts being released now. Well, CRISPR gene edited yeasts, I believe they say, which in the US is unregulated, and New Zealand would be considered a GMO. So,
what did they remove?
I don't know. It's Omega yeast, and I've got a couple of them. One of them they've either taken out or they've amplified that banana clove one for the Hefeweizens. But they also did one that would biotransform, or no, it releases thiols or something. It's a hazy IPA one. They've modified something in. I think there's another company that's done it too. So there's at least 2 or 3 modified yeasts available commercially via homebrew stores in the US if you want.
Don't they know that hazy's just a craze?
What's that?
Don't they know that hazy's just a craze?
Hope so.
It's a craze, but I don't see it going away in a hurry. I mean, I think it's here to stay. It's just.
Oh, God help us.
I think a lot of the things that hazy hazy was a response to problems, and the problems are like overly bitter beers and stuff that really just was too much, and I think you'll see a lot of styles where bitterness isn't the focus, and where you got more expressive, more open kind of flavors.
I think hazy's gone beyond being just a trendy thing for 1 year. I think it's going to be, but the West Coast IPA is not going to die off either. No. But they're always going to be there. And actually, I prefer a West Coast IPA to a hazy anyway. But, a nice hazy is nice. Just they all taste bloody same. I don't know if anyone else finds that. But
Well, it is, and the problem is if you go too far off the target, they taste like shit. I mean, they work when they're juicy and all the rest of it. When you take out all that juice factor and everything else like that, they get phenolic, they get astringent, they get harsh. They've got no, and but so okay, so that means everything ends up being Mosaic Citra base with something else on top of it.
Yeah, and I don't understand why they don't use a lot more, Motueka and Selvin and some of those sort of things in them. I guess they just can't get them, maybe, in the volumes they need. But I mean, those Motueka. So Motueka is in our brewery, we use Motueka as our positive control. Every brew we do, we have one beer with Motueka. One of our dry hop beers has Motueka in it, and that's just, it's a nice hop. It's not as in your face as Selvin or Nectaron or Rewalker, but
it's round. It's a nice, average hop. Nice.
Yeah. If I want to brew,
hop's got good scaffolding.
Yeah. If I want to brew a beer at home, I'd base Motueka as my base hop basically from just an easy drinking summer beer. Some of those other ones can be a little bit too in your face. I say that's what the industry wants, so that's what we're aiming for. But and that's all dry hopped at the same rate too. By the way, if you dry hop, but you can always back off the dry hopping and Selvin, and all of a sudden it's not as in your face. But
when you say the same rate, you mean the alpha acids?
No, same rate as in grams per litre.
Right. Okay. So your baseline. Oh, okay.
No. So sorry, this is our dry hopping only. I do look at alpha acids for the bittering component, but like if I'm bittering anything really, I just use Pacific Jade. I don't really muck around with too much else. But that's
alphas don't play a huge role in dry hopping.
No, I'm not a good example of what I use in my brewing though, because I use what I get for free. So
smart man.
I get Jade.
But I mean, Motueka is a wickedly underrated hop in New Zealand. I think. I also think I know a lot of brewers that use it like Americans use Cascade a lot as a scaffolding hop. It's got a really long palate. Like you got hops like Citra, which I call really front loaded. They whack you at the front, and then they kind of die off. And people like Mosaic because it's got a long palate. So solvent. But I mean, it's a lot of the real classic West Coast brewers use Cascade almost because it's got this really long, kind of full kind of flavor. It wasn't shouty to sort of kind of give all the other hops length. And I think Motueka can do that wickedly, with as a New Zealand hop example. It's a great hop.
Yeah, I agree totally. Any other questions?
I think we've probably done.
Have I covered everything? Who's still here?
You're still here.
15 here still.
Well, I think it's one of those things that, almost every brew has hops in it, so it's got to be something of interest, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can, play around the yeast as much as you want. Yeast and your hops is kind of like your big variables in a lot of these beers. Considering, so many of the beers produced are hazies, they do make a big impact.
Yep.
But that bitterness race, where the haze were response to the West Coast. Even some of my beers of just taking that bitterness back a little bit. So you can actually, appreciate the malt a little bit more.
Yeah.
And you can appreciate the subtle flavors a little bit more as well.
High bitterness can also suppress hop character too. You got to mention your taste buds are a little bit almost like sea anemones in some ways. They just close up if you hit them too harsh. I think one great message I think you gave tonight, Kerry, is that often less is more. I mean, I know you see a lot of brewers who go through and they're not getting the hop kind of flavors they want, so they up it, they keep upping it, and all you do is you end up with these vegetal cabbage bombs. And with the vegetable and the flavors, the hop flavors just get collapsed in amongst themselves. And it's when they actually step back and sort of start working on clean fermentation, because that's probably the biggest challenge you've got to actually getting really good hop profile. If your fermentation is even slightly dirty or anything ester wise or whatever masks hop character, But what you're talking about there and sort of getting around the 10 grams per litre and start from there and then work on getting the max out of that before you start sort of going through the roof. I think that's a great message.
I said Tom Shellhammer, who's probably one of the gurus of brewing science in the world at the moment.
Hell yeah.
His theory was, 8 grams per litre. He's got a paper on. He's got a paper on it. 8 grams per litre is the number. They said the only reason we do 10 grams per litre is the math's easy. When you're sitting there and you've got a bag of hops and you go, I've got 5 litres. I need 50 grams of hops. It's simple. Yes, we have a calculator sitting there.
Decimal system, Kerry.
What's that?
That's why we've got the decimal system.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't be able to survive in the States, I don't think.
But it is also the fact that like an extra 2 grams a litre is going to intensify flavors, so it's going to be a little bit more to be able to pick up those subtle differences a little bit more.
I don't know. We didn't really do too much testing. I didn't test much on dry hop rates when we actually set on our recipe. Actually, I did test dry hop length. So we tested 24, 48, 72, and what's the next one? Whatever.
What'd you find on that?
The difference between 24 and 48 was marginally slightly more at 48, but if 24 was fine. We quite happily would have dry hopped for 24 hours. 48 happened to suit our production, just the way what we had to do in the brewery. So we settled on 48. We used to do 4-day dry hop, and that was just, we were getting all these vegetable sort of characters, and hey, they've gone. I honestly, if I've walked in there, the guy, he's dry hopped in the morning. I've gone, I know that hop. I've seen, there's a number there I know is in the system, and I'm going to try that one. So it's been sitting on the dry hops for about 3 hours. They can still taste bloody good. Yep. That's a warm flat beer. It's, to some extent, we could almost do a hop sensory off that and be done with it. But
well, that's interesting.
I mean,
all I'm going to say is I'd listen to what, because there's a lot of stuff that commercial guys do. I can't really talk about it because if I do, I'll just get ostracized. But how they do things is really different from how homebrewers do it. And I think what you're saying is very, very good information.
Yeah.
Short is best.
Yeah.
Saying what I can.
we do our dry hop at 21 degrees, but that's for at distill rest temperature. I know there's a lot of people out there who actually dry hop cool, but you got to remember, we're not trying to we're trying to get through everything quick. We just want a quick turnaround. If we wanted to package our beers, I possibly would dry hop cooler, because you get, otherwise the theory, I think
you wouldn't get the uptake that you're getting either.
Well, certain chemicals are more soluble. You'll get different chemicals going. Some of them are soluble at lower temperatures than others, and you'd get a different ratio of the chemicals coming out of the hops. I'm kind of interested to try it, but there's only so many things we can do. And as it is, people go, oh, why don't you use this hop as a late hop or a whirlpool hop, or why don't you chuck it in something? And it's like, well, I want to try and brew with 8. I want to get as many. Hop breeding's about numbers. Any breeding program is a numbers game. So the more you can screen, and even though we're only doing it at the dry hop stage, we're still getting a pretty good idea if that hop's got something interesting about it.
You've got to limit your variables, and to do that, you've got to constrain the process.
Yeah,
which is exactly what you've done.
Yeah, I'm going to go back some of the really advanced things. Yeah, I'll go back and I'll use them as a bittering hop and as maybe a whirlpool hop, maybe in the hop back, but not only if we've got time, basically. Yeah.
Well, we've taken up quite a bit of your time, so you're free to leave if you'd like to. But
I'm happy to. I love talking about hops. This
you got the right job there, haven't you?
coming down here was a dream job. It really was. The move down here was,
I think you've made it your own too, bud. I mean, like, it's a pretty hard thing to come under behind Ron. And I just know from people I've talked to in the industry and stuff like that, you're actually definitely building your own respect base there. So well done.
Cool. Well, cheers. Yeah, I mean, Ron's a great guy. I mean, he's a legend in plant breeding, let alone hops. You know, he has been involved in kiwi fruit breeding and also everything, tobacco, kiwi fruit, apples, pears, bloody berry fruit. Hops is just the thing he stuck with over his entire career, or most of his career. If I can be half as successful as him, I'll be happy.